Cheers, Simon. Morning, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about, I've sort of called this presentation Being Passionate But Not Precious, and we're gonna break down what that actually means. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in UX for around 10 years now, and I've been freelancing for quite a few years for different projects. I've got an interest in psychology and self-development. I'm not an expert, and I'm not an academic in it, but I'll be sharing you some thoughts, some ideas that I've kind of personally found interesting and useful in my career, and hopefully it's something that you can also take something away. So what we're going to look at today, we'll just look at roughly some definitions, just so we're all on the same page, and then a little bit about why this is an important topic, why I think this is important, why hopefully you'll also think is important. Some of the key challenges facing designers, and then we'll deep dive a little bit into the deeper insights about the mind, and then strategies on how to mitigate some of those challenges. And then we'll obviously also look at the impact on collaboration, and that'll kind of obviously be a theme that runs through it. And then we'll have some question time at the end. Okay, so being passionate. So in terms of what do we mean by passion? So this is kind of the Oxford English Dictionary. Obviously, there's loads of definitions for this. An intense desire or enthusiasm for something. So this is obviously, as designers, bringing out how you want to do the best that you can do for a design, for the users, for what's required of you, what's been asked of you. And precious, so of great value, not to be wasted or treated carelessly. So obviously, some of you will see the Lord of the Rings GIF there. That's, I guess, something about what we're trying to get at is that so something can be precious. Of course, there's lots of things in life that are very precious, but there's also something about preciousness that can become a little bit unhealthy, or there's an attachment there that can create something which isn't necessarily going to be beneficial for you and for other people, just like Sméagol in Lord of the Rings. There's also another interesting word in this title of this presentation, which is about being. And might get missed a lot of the time. But obviously being is the nature or essence of a person. And so what we're going to be looking at here today is not just about what you can actually do, so it's not about doing, a lot of it is actually about being and who you are and what you bring to a team, and how we can be looking at that in a little bit more detail and understanding it a little bit more, not from a doing aspect, but from a being aspect. Okay, so why is this actually an important topic? Well, the first thing to say, I guess, is that collaboration, we can't actually assume that it happens automatically. It's not something that we necessarily can just kind of join in a new team. A lot of the time as designers, we're kind of asked to join a new team, and then that team's given a task, and you're basically on the go straight away. And you have to figure out exactly who the personalities are in the team, and it doesn't always go right. And if we assume that collaboration is something that just happens automatically, we might not be doing enough in order to actively do something about it. So that's why we've got to look at why we can still be passionate about what we're doing, but let's break down a little bit about how we can step away from our work and sort of tackle some of the challenges that we'll get. We also need to work with others effectively for any project. So, this is something that absolutely affects our daily lives. And this isn't even just in a work situation, but generally in our life as well. In order to achieve something, in order to get something done, we've got to be able to collaborate, we've got to be able to work with people. The other aspect of it is better self-awareness. So, of course, we want to know as much about ourselves as we can, and I think this isn't really given as much importance in a sort of a work and corporate setting. We kind of just assume that we already know what there is to know about ourselves, and so we just get on with it and just sort of deep dive into a project and get going with the things. But what we want to do is take a little bit of a step back look at what I was mentioning before around how we can look at who we are, who we're being in a team. And then finally, the journey over the result. Again, a lot of the time in sort of work situations, we're very result focused. So we're thinking about how do we achieve what we've been given, what the task is, what the requirement is. How do we kind of give something to the client which answers their questions and helps solve the design problem that we're working on. But the other side of it is also that this, we're actually just living our lives, and work is part of that. And if it's just as important, if not more important, that we actually enjoy the process that we go through, as well as the result. And there's no point of working on a project or being in a project and falling out with lots of people, and really not enjoying the experience and coming away from it thinking, oh God, that was a really scarring experience. Like, I want to avoid lots of things there. And we can do things that will help us in the moment and actually help us to take on some of those challenges, so that we actually can enjoy the process as well as the result. So challenges in designer's life. So some of you will be very familiar with a lot of these, and we'll just dive straight in. So, of course, unsatisfied stakeholders. So when we design something, when we've worked on something and we're presenting it, there's often the case where you'll have people that kind of aren't satisfied with what you've created, and at this point, as a designer, you also have to kind of take on that criticism, or you have to take on that feedback and figure out how you're going to deal with it. And it's a very common thing, right? Not everything goes. Not stakeholders don't often say, "Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm happy with everything in that." So that's one challenge. Obviously, critical feedback. So this is where, obviously, in many cases, it's dealt with very, very well. But there will be cases where receiving critical feedback, again, it's something that as designers we have to learn, and we have to figure out how we deal with this. And there's lots of ways to deal with it, and some will be more effective than others. And also, there's lots of ways to deal with it because you're dealing with different people. There's every situation is different. So we'll look at some strategies which can help sort of tackle that. And of course, as designers, we sit in quite a kind of a precarious position, because we're sort of in the middle of this situation where we have the different needs of business, technology, and the users. So and those don't always, and often they don't align. So we have actually got to navigate our way through some of these differing needs, and it's often UX IXA is often about how we come up with the best compromise that works and achieves the goals for all of these various different needs in the best possible way, because you're not going to be able to please everyone. You might have a client which needs a certain design problem solved, but they don't yet have the technology to achieve the ideal solution for it, or it might be a bad solution for the user. So all of these is about how we find compromise, and because we're talking about working with other human beings, we're talking about how we compromise with each other, how we actually work out how to navigate each other's sort of needs. And then, of course, the big one is always time constraint. Obviously, time is money, and budgets aren't unlimited, and obviously, time isn't unlimited as well. So what we're kind of doing is we're establishing that there's lots of these sort of external challenges which we're very, very well aware of. We know about this because, as designers, we work on these things all the time, and we come up against them all the time. So there's lots of these sort of external challenges, and the question that kind of interests me, and the question that I'm going to be asking a little bit in this presentation, is whether there's anything different, whether there's anything internal that actually affects how we make design decisions. So I'll put it to you that actually there's a big one, which is the designer themselves. So So actually, there's obviously the designer's internal subjective state that will play a key role in reacting to the various external challenges. So although it's the external challenges that we take for granted in deciding if a project will be difficult or easy to work on, we actually tend to ignore the internal challenges that occur on a daily basis. And I guess some people might say that, well, we get better with experience. We get better with just with time. Like as we get experience, we become more professional. We get better at dealing with all the stuff that goes on internally. But what we've got to recognize actually is that every individual actually, it could be said that every individual actually devises their own subconscious strategy of how to actually deal with certain situations and people. And that's kind of the area that we'll be focusing on in this talk. So you can see this diagram again. We've got sort of all of these various different external challenges. And here what I want to kind of get across is that all these challenges actually affect a designer's design decisions. Because we don't actually design in a vacuum or a perfect environment. We actually design in an imperfect world. And also, we don't actually experience any of these sort of external challenges for what they actually are. So, for example, we don't actually experience a shortage of time as an actual shortage of time, because an actual shortage of time is just a conceptual idea. We experience it in a different language, which is actually the internal language of the body and the mind, which is effectively biochemical reactions which are taking place in your body and your mind, and they show up as sensations or thoughts that are occurring. So we might recognize some of these, but others we may be completely unaware of because we haven't really paid attention. So what are those kinds of things? So let's have a look. Some common translations of various different human experiences in terms of sensations in the actual internal state. So heat in the belly, for example, very common sensation when, let's say, you feel anger or you feel an emotion, you'll actually feel it as heat. Shallow breathing, your breath will change if you're like nervous or anxious. Frustration, of course, everyone feels that in various different ways. Not every individual will have the same sensations for the different emotions. You might experience anxiety about a particular design decision. Have you made the right choice? Have you done the right thing? A lot of people will question their own ability or competence because when you're not sure about something, this is, again, it's translating into a thought pattern. So it's like, am I sure I know how to do this? You might replay a situation or a conversation in the mind. That's quite typical after a confrontational conversation or something that's been difficult. You'll leave that situation thinking that it's been dealt with, but we all know that actually what's going on for every single person is that it's just replaying in the head different scenarios over and over again. And also common one, thinking about what others will think. Very common thing that's going on. What will that person think about me designing it this way? That's going to affect your decision. Your design decision will be affected by all of these things because they are actually impacting you in a very real way in the present. So I mean, hands up, who recognizes some of these? Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's the reason why a lot of you put your hands up is because we're human beings, and this is how the human body reacts and actually deals with these things. But it's often we don't really talk about it. So what we'll do is we'll delve a little bit deeper into some of the kind of the ways of the working of the mind. Now, like I said, I'm not an expert in psychology, but there's a couple of concepts which I quite like, which have been helpful to me. So I'll highlight just like two two specific things, and we'll talk a little bit about them. I mean, this is a huge topic, and there's lots of varying different theories and conflicting theories. So, this might be completely wrong, but that's okay. It's been helpful for me. Hopefully, it'll be helpful for you. So one of the first things I would like to talk about is semi-conscious behavior patterns based on past experiences. So this is where you may have had a past experience, and you'll change your behavior based on something that you've already done. And we'll go into that a little bit more. And then subconscious internal programming. So this might take the form of different things. And again, we'll go into these a little bit more. Automatic functions, things that you might not actually be aware of that are happening. How we've actually learnt to operate in society. And also the human mind's ego, this concept of an ego. So starting with the first one, semi-conscious behavior patterns. So this is where, let's say, for example, a common one is like, as a young child, you may have touched something hot or fire, and you don't touch it again because obviously you become aware that if you touch that, it hurts you. You don't want to do that again. You don't want to experience the pain again because it's unpleasant, right? So and those things are fantastic because we learn from our past mistakes. We make mistakes, we learn from them, and we move on. And it helps us to improve our dealing with people and situations and life, and we don't make the same mistakes. Fantastic. However, where that can sometimes go slightly wrong is where we actually apply it incorrectly to certain human relationships. So, that's not always useful. Sometimes it is, and not always. So, for example, someone was rude to me the day before. Someone was rude to me before on a project that I've worked with. So now I happen to have to work with this person again. But this time, I've learnt from my past mistake. I'm going to keep my distance as much as possible. And also, if you're slightly more inclined, you might actually say, well, actually, I'm going to make their life difficult because they annoyed me really in the last project, and I'm definitely going to make sure I'm going to make their life difficult. If they ask me something, I'm going to ignore them. If they're trying to get some help from me, forget it. I'm not going to be available for them. Now that is that's basically something that we've decided. It's a semi-conscious decision because we're aware of it, and we have taken something that's happened in the past and we've applied it to that situation in the present. So we just have to be aware that this actually does happen often, and we do it regularly, and we have to question it because we have to say, well, actually, is that actually useful? Is the learning that I took from the past relevant to today? And often, in case of dealing with human beings, often it's worthwhile questioning because people are different in lots of different situations. Every individual has lots of things going on that affects their behaviors in different ways. I mean, we're talking not just daily, but like hourly. So it's often worthwhile questioning this behavior within yourself because the situation might have changed. The circumstances for the other person may have changed. So, it's just something simple as, okay, look, I'm going to treat this as a new situation. I'm not going to use the kind of behavior that I have where I learn from my mistakes in this context. In other contexts, it might be perfectly applicable. Okay, so then we move on to the second area that I want to talk about, which is it's the subconscious internal programming. So this may account for what I'm calling automatic functions. So I've got a little bit of a quick survey that I'd like you to do just to get this going. So the question is a statement, and I just want you to put your hands up if you think this is true or false. I'll tell you to do that in a second. So thoughts and feelings generally come before an action. So hands up if you think that statement is true. Okay, and hands up if you think it's false. Okay, so it's kind of split. Brilliant. So, I mean, when we think about the answer to this question, it's not surprising that we're not sure about that because, in some ways, we aspire to think before we act. So, in that context, we might say, yeah, actually, I'd like to think that I think before I act, and therefore the thoughts that come before it, relate to the action that I'm doing. It's something that we want to strive for, and that and that we like to think about ourselves. However, we also know that a lot of the things that we do on autopilot. So, we're aware that there's a lot of things in the day that we might just do just automatically because it's routine. And actually, in those situations, the thoughts and the feelings might not actually come before it. We're literally just acting, right? Okay. And we'd also say that, we're not robots or machines. So, we have autonomy. We make our own decisions. Every second we're making our own decisions. And we don't run sort of on uncontrollable programming. We're in charge of ourselves. And we're autonomous. So I've got another question for you. Again, same thing. So one of the things that makes humans unique is that we are in control of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. So again, based on that statement, hands up if you think that's true. Okay, and hands up if you think that's false. Okay, cool, good. All right, cool. So we had more for false, I would say, than true. And that's really, really good to see because in a way, of course, one of the things that does make us unique is that we have control of our thoughts and feelings, but we're also aware as people that there's lots of situations where we don't feel in control, right? So being able to actually think about something and act based on those thoughts, we make mistakes, and that's where even our criminal law system, it would penalise somebody more if they've thought about a crime and then commit the crime versus I wasn't thinking, I was just I just acted in I don't know what I was doing, I wasn't thinking, and I've just acted and I've committed a crime, blah blah blah. So, but the important thing is that every moment automatic programming, some level of automatic programming is there running in the background, and that's possibly one of the key things. Your breath, your heartbeat. We're not thinking about these things; they're just happening. There's lots of internal processes that are occurring automatically. And I'd just like to do a small activity just to kind of bring to light kind of this concept. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of tell our minds to just stop thinking. For 20 seconds, we're just going to say, don't think about anything, and we're going to stop. So I'll tell you when the 20 seconds over, but if we just start that, I'll give you a countdown, and then I'll tell you when the 20 seconds over, okay? So 3, 2, 1, okay, stop thinking. Okay, that's 20 seconds. Felt like a long time, but which is interesting as well. So who had some thoughts? So we were saying don't think, but who actually had some thoughts come up? Hands up. Cool. Okay, brilliant. So I mean, we can see that the majority of people, even something as basic as directing our own mind, just like that's us, to say, okay, don't think about anything. Like I'm actually telling you, don't think about anything. We aren't able to do that. And it's not necessarily something that we aren't able to do forever. I mean, you can achieve that, but I guess as with anything, it takes training, it takes practice. But it brings about the question, how much of our perceived autonomy is subject to automatic function? Because if we aren't actually able, like we've just experienced, able to direct our thinking and our thoughts, and about 50% of us said, actually thoughts come before our actions as well. How much is that actually impacting our actions? So it brings about that question. We just got to, that's what we want to start thinking about is, oh wow, okay, maybe I'm not in control as much as I thought. We tend to overestimate how much control we actually have. Okay, so the second point of this is how we've actually learned to operate in society. So there's obviously lots of different theories on this again that explain the human psyche, personalities, and So there's many different studies. I'm just going to pull out two just kind of help to explain my point. So obviously there's many different ways, but some common themes relate to conditioning that occur, and particularly a lot of them explain about early childhood, and that at an early age we create a strategy to deal with life situations. For example, let's say a child, so what one of the theories, a child may have had a sibling that was much louder, demanded their attention a lot, and they felt intruded on. So that type of personality might have created a strategic defense of withdrawal, for example. So they would minimize contact to simplify their needs, and they prefer to remain private and be in the background. And someone of that personality, for example, in this context, they might find it easier to follow, let's say, a data-driven approach to UX because it can minimize conflict, it's hard to argue with, and it appears as objective, right? So you'll have different ways. So this person particularly is just like saying, well, if the way I'm kind of dealing with this is I'm just going to withdraw, just be a bit more private. There's no right or wrong about it, but we just have to be aware of this approach because actually it may not work and it may not always be feasible in every project. For example, if I prefer a data-driven approach, and as a freelancer, I have to work on lots of different projects, but then I get a project where we don't have the data. Normally requires some time and extra development work to get everything set up correctly, and also it may not actually the data that I do have, for example, may not actually translate into a very clear decision. So it may not actually help me answer the design question that I'm being asked. So I may actually have to invest more time into doing further research to figure out, to get the right data in order to answer the question. And as part of that, there's also interpretation, right? So it's just to be aware that there may have been certain ways and strategies that I've developed in my life that may help or may hinder me in the projects that I work on, in my design work that I do. An alternative theory, which this one is like Adlerian psychology, so it's different to the Freudian one, but it identifies that we all experience some level of inferiority in our childhood. So as a child, we're dependent on our parents, let's say, as adults, and that in our adult lives, we aim to compensate for that, which leads us to create like a fictional final goal. And that might be subconscious or it may be conscious. And it affects all of our thoughts, feelings, actions in our life, and they all move towards this sort of fictional goal. And it's whether it's true or not, whether you agree or disagree, it's an interesting inquiry to make about ourselves, to ask, what, if any, goal might I be pursuing in my life, and do I still choose that? Because what we've been talking about before is that all of these things may actually be impacting the decisions that we're making. Of course, in the design decisions that we're making, but also the decision that we're making in life. So obviously we don't have enough time to go through in any more detail, but the overarching point is that there might be subconscious aspects of how we interact and live our lives that might be conditioned from an early age and that we have limited control over. So, and we might be mostly unaware of this unless we actually make some effort to uncover our own personal workings, how we actually operate. And that's come back to the point of, it might be useful to actually look into some of these things for ourselves. I've certainly found that useful. Okay, and then the final concept we'll kind of just cover is the human ego, the human's mind ego. So again, there's many definitions for this. The one that I'm interested in talking about, and is the one that we call what is myself, my sense of identity. So for example, the easy way to explain this is through a story. So let's say I'm going on holiday with some friends. I kind of just walking, and I see a stranger. Just as I'm walking by, they drop their phone on the floor, their phone breaks, and I think, oh, God, and just kind of walk on by. A bit later on in the day, my friend drops their phone, and it drops to the floor, and I think, oh, gosh, like, I feel bad for my friend, like, oh, they've dropped their phone. but not too bad. Like, it wasn't my phone, so, you know, I'm all right with that. And then later on in the day, I drop my phone, and it breaks. And I think, oh my God, my phone, that's my phone. It's broken, right? And and I feel terrible about it. Like, what am I going to do? I need to go get a new phone. I can't message people. So what's the difference there? I mean, the same thing happened. The phone dropped and it broke in 3 different situations. The difference was my relationship to the phone, right? I was closer to my phone than I was to the phone of a stranger, and a little bit less than my friend. So it's basically telling us the difference about sort of how we relate to things and how our relationship with it. And you know, this diagram here sort of expands on that. You know, we have an identity that sits somewhere within us, and then outside of that is my body, my family, my work, my things. And so the ego kind of extends itself out. And the key taking here is that, you know, what we can do is we can kind of try to distance our identity from our work. So the ego expands itself out into the things that we own, and like, for example, the phone. Now, if I'm not so attached to my phone and it breaks, it's going to impact me less. I'm not going to be so fussed about it. It's not going to make me as unsettled, right? So we can do a similar thing with our work. We might be able to better detach ourselves from the challenges that we feel that are affecting our personality, and so cause less of a reaction. And so therefore we're kind of less, if we're able to build that detachment up, we're less likely to run off those automatic responses, because we're more likely to do that when it's closer to our personal identity. And so when we have that attachment to things, you know, let's say, for example, this phone, it's gonna trigger a response that's automatic much more easily. So we can still be passionate about what we're doing, but if we build that distance up a little bit with the work, it means that we're not as precious. And so if there's changes or, you know, criticisms and all the challenges that we talked about, it's going to help to kind of just bring, not for us to be actually say, okay, look, I can actually make a controlled decision about this. And the other point about this is that it's not just about building that distance up intellectually. It's about building it in your actual being. And it's, of course, takes practice to be able to do that with particularly your work. When you'll notice the difference when you're intellectually distanced from your work and when you're actually distanced from your work, because you'll react differently to all the challenges that we were mentioning. Okay, so a brief summary of kind of some of the, well, it's not a summary, I'll just take you through some of the strategies to mitigate some of the challenges. Some of them will be aware. External challenges, you know, we're more familiar with. They can be kind of changed based on the process and methodology we use. You know, we might want to, you know, if you conduct more effective reviews in agile methodologies, for example, you know, you're going to challenge some of those challenges much better. If you engage closely with your stakeholders, you do testing and learning, of course, those things are going to help. Team management, you know, by finding the right mix of people in the team, you're going to acknowledge that you're going to have a team that works better together. These things we're like more familiar with. You know, early engagement with our work, getting feedback earlier, getting better feedback loops. These things all seem much more normal. They're kind of like, yeah, of course that's going to help challenge some of those challenges that we had, the external ones. But when we look at some of the internal challenges, it seems a bit more weird. It seems like, like I wouldn't really think about applying that in my work setting. What does it mean? What's some of those strategies? Well, self-awareness and self-inquiry, that's kind of like we've just been like, hitting the tip of the iceberg on that. You know, the power of the approach of taking and tackling some of these challenges from an internal perspective is that we're the common denominator in all of the challenges that we face as designers, and all those situations. By learning about how we react to things, we'll be better aware of how our mind works and better able to deal with those situations. So, have a look at some of the psychological theories that are helpful for you to understand yourself. You might not, agree with them all, but look at them, have a look, see if there is something there you can take, how you can understand some of your default conditioning. And of course, it will also have the added benefit of you being able to understand other people better, because as you understand, how the mind works in a bit more detail, you'll understand, okay, this person, actually, they're probably just struggling with this or that, and it's, and it will affect how you are actually dealing with that situation. The other important one, meditation and using the breath to focus the mind, something that's helped me personally very much. One of the key things here is that it's not about, it's not like a religious thing, it's more of a kind of just a practice to understand, how your mind is working. It's tried and tested, repeatable methods from yoga, meditation, and one of the key things around the breath, for example, we're talking about our mind and how we can how we overestimate how much we're in control. Well, the breath is actually, the reason why sometimes breath is used is because the breath is an element in the body that is both automatic, we don't need to regulate it all the time, and yet we can control it, we can regulate it if we want to. And so it's an aspect of the body that has both automatic function as well as controllable. And it's also linked to the mind. Because when you're flustered or when you're a bit anxious, your breath changes. We're all aware of that, and so the reverse can also be done. So if you actually learn to regulate your breath, you're also affecting the mind and how it works. And then equanimity. So this is kind of a great practice and a strategy to use. It's about how it's a practice that to empower action rather than our automatic reaction. Equanimity is just kind of staying neutral, and it's a practice that you have to get good at. If you're able to employ this strategy in situations where you're challenged or you face some of those challenges, it's going to serve you well. Certainly, I've found it helpful. And it just kind of, again, it comes back to the point of not reacting with your automatic behaviors. Okay, and finally, just to kind of wrap it up in terms of how it impacts collaboration more is by focusing on self rather than the external challenges, we might actually be able to better control how we handle with life and work situations and allow us to come from the standpoint of self-growth and not just accepting the things the way they are, which is often kind of how we deal with these things. It's like, that's just, it's just a rubbish situation, I'll just carry on. By actually taking action around this, we can actually help better collaborate and also be more equanimous to the ups and downs of work and life. And of course, dealing with changes and difficult conversations, we can also, help us to listen better and be present with other people. And because a lot of these challenges that we face as designers, like I said, is human being to human being interaction. And by being present with other people and, listening to them more, we're of course going to impact collaboration because we're going to be more effective at working with other people. And then of course, being passionate but not precious about our work. So we build that distance